Hello, once again, and welcome to the Senior Seminar Podcast. My name is Sean Williams, and I'm the Associate Professor of Political Science here at Campbellsville University, coming to you from Campbellsville, Kentucky. And I am here once again with three of the Senior Seminar students, and we're here to talk about the topic of religion in public schools, the relationship between religion and politics in America, and how that plays out in the public school arena. The three senior seminar students who we have with us today are from my left to my right. We have Marshall Still, we have Jesus, and we have Cindy. How are you guys doing this evening?
Good. Well.
Fantastic. Rounding. We're coming to you tonight from about 9:30 p.m. here in the Eastern Time Zone. And so the topic for tonight is one of those things that comes up a lot, certainly here at a religiously affiliated institution living in rural Kentucky. It's the debate about what should the relationship between church and state be. Specifically, what should the relationship be in the public school setting? On one hand, you have individuals who think that basically religion should be kept completely out of the state and out of educational situations. On the other hand, you have people who have some very legitimate arguments about what happens when you remove religion from an otherwise religious society. So to help us start off on this topic, first of all, for viewers at home who may be less familiar with this debate, what is religious freedom in the United States like? How do we define religious freedom? What does the Constitution tell us about religious freedom?
I think it is a free exercise to practice, preach your religion. It is found in the First Amendment. So anyone is allowed to have and to preach their own religion.
Yeah, it's a two-part portion of the First Amendment of the Constitution that both, there's a free exercise clause and an establishment clause, which the free exercise says that you are essentially allowed to practice any religion or practice no religion without government oversight or government mandate, I guess. And the establishment clause essentially just says that the government cannot endorse a single religion. There can't be a state regulated religion. But those are really the only two mentions of it in the Constitution.
And somebody who teaches political science and civil liberties, the distinction between the two is really kind of important. On the one hand, there's this notion that church and state should be kept separate because of the Establishment Clause, but also the idea that religion is somehow protected because of the free exercise clause. And I think it's probably when we start to confuse the difference between the two that a lot of questions emerge, especially as it relates to public schools. So one of the ways that we sort through all this is from time to time, the United States Supreme Court gets court cases. They listen to the cases, they make decisions about how cases should be decided, and then we use previous cases as a way of informing our understanding of the future. One of the cases created something called the Lemon Test, and most of what we talk about tonight is essentially going to come from that. So somebody let us know, what is the Lemon Test? What does it tell us about the relationship between church and state in the United States?
Sure. It was a 1971 court case, Lemon versus Kurtzman, and essentially the outcome of the case was a three-pronged standard for whether a situation is violating in either of those two principles or clauses in the Constitution. The first is it has to have a secular legislative purpose. The primary effect of it must be one that either advances or neither advances nor inhibits religion, and it can't foster an excessive government entanglement with religion. So three distinct outlines that keep religion from either being too entangled with government or keeping government from being too strict on the free practice of religion.
Do you guys feel that this is a reasonable place to get started in thinking about religion? Does this set a bar too high? for the relationship between the two? Does it seem like a good place to start?
I think at the time it was a good place to start, because how else were you supposed to know like what the standard was to be set for if you could or couldn't practice things in a school setting, or even I guess in a government setting for that reason, since it says, you know, couldn't have much government entanglement with religion. But I mean, now I don't know if it so much is, because we kind of surpass it almost in what we do.
Yeah, and I think it's good that we use the limit test, maybe if only for the purpose of it being the first real procedural update to how we deal with this since the inception of the Constitution. It's really nice. It's a little surprising that it took to 1971 for there to be sort of like a standardized way that we interpret this, but I really like it because it's not complicated, and it sort of is just explaining out those two clauses in a modern sense.
So let's take these two different principles. One, this idea that we have a wall of separation, wall of protection, the exercise versus establishment clause. On the other hand, this way of applying religion, the limit test. And let's talk about how religion plays out in the public sphere. So the first argument of discussion, religion in public schools. Is religion allowed in public schools in America? In what situations, under what settings? How would you explain it to somebody from another country?
I think school officials are not allowed to impose prayers. However, students, they can, because they are not attached to the government regulations and stuff like that. But I really believe that a school should avoid to teach religion, because you don't know who are you teaching, and that person can take that teaching as an insult, because you don't know if you're teaching a Muslim or Hinduist or whatever.
Prayers in public schools are allowed. Sorry, it's allowed under student-led, but you're not supposed to. I'm going to say supposed to because some schools still do this. But you're not supposed to let them use government property. So that does mean like the school building, the PA systems, the microphones that they're using, anything that has came from like government funding for the schools, you're not supposed to use it.
Yeah, I grew up in Texas, and of course there's some aspects of Texas religion that outsiders have to get familiar with. One of those aspects is that football games are effectively church services, and like all good church services, almost every football game I've ever been to was opened with prayer, completely in violation of the U.S. Constitution, because it happens, as Ms. Gilbin was pointing out, it happens over the loudspeaker, and yet you know, it's something that kind of happens. So Jesus, you were mentioning a second ago about the pitfalls of teaching or talking about or referring to religion in public schools. What is the difference between teaching religion on the one hand and teaching about religion on the other? Are both of those things that the state should avoid, or is one worse than the other one?
I think that teaching about religion is something more direct, because you're going to put someone who is teaching something that he believes. And teach about religion, I think it is more like the history of religion, the different kind of religion. I think that's okay to teach, because people should know that religion is something that embrace every country, but not teach a specific religion, because you're messing with someone else's religion. Well, you could.
Yeah, and to add to that, you know, the whole point of public schooling is to increase the people that are in the schools' knowledge of the world and give you experience in what you're going to encounter. So I think it's a good idea for public schools to teach about religion. Maybe it's the top 5 major world religions, or it's the, you know, there would be some standard for it. But if you're going to encounter that kind of stuff across, outside of your high school, then I think it's a good idea to teach about it for sure. And that difference is definitely a big one. Teaching religion, I think the issue that arises there is you are moving children's minds in a certain direction about the religious doctrine. You're not necessarily just stating the doctrine, you're also adding some validity to it, which isn't necessarily, because of those two clauses, any insinuation that the religion has some sort of like legitimacy other than just as an institution is an establishment clause issue.
But is that something realistically that you think that people can do? I mean, is it possible to teach about religion and yet do it in a way that is completely unbiased, especially if the person who's teaching is in fact a believer in faith? Could they honestly say, here are several religions that happen, but you get to choose for yourself? Or is even that too far of a step for public schools?
Well, I mean, even in our social studies classes, you still have world civilization. I know I had to take that in high school, and we learned about other religions. We learned about Islam and how it got its start. We learned about Hinduism and how it got its start, and we learned about Buddhism. And I mean, I think you can teach other religions without being like, yeah, I believe this. So, I mean, I think it's kind of tricky, but at the same time, you shouldn't just single out one religion when doing so, like what Kentucky is doing with like the Bible literacy thing, where they're teaching it as a social studies class. I mean, that can be fine, but why just that one when you already have world civilizations and you have all the other religions that you're already learning about too?
Yeah, I think I agree with Cindy. It's definitely possible, but the current way, I'm sort of reflecting on my 7th grade year, whatever class we took, learned about ancient Mesopotamia, and the way that other world religions were discussed is sort of in like consciously analyzing them as like a mysticism, as some sort of hokey ancient world religion, unless we're discussing something like Christianity in the United States. It definitely, whether intentionally or not, it seems like it's addressed in a different way depending on what the religion is in discussion, at least in a school setting.
Do you feel then that in the school setting that schools should be required to teach all religions equally, or at least, as you refer to, the 5 major religions? Or is it okay to pick favorites and to say that, look, some religions are more valuable than others. Some religions are more important in history than others. Let's focus more on, say, Christianity than Islam or Hinduism or Shintoism.
If you want to teach the roots about religion, I think they should bring all religions. I remember taking this class, and this professor started talking about Jesus and Christianity, and I had next to me two girls from India, and they are Hindus, and this professor told to them like, I know that you believe in Hinduism, but still Jesus loved you. Jesus is the proper way to go, but I respect yours. And I was like, what are you saying? I mean, like, I don't know. If you want to talk about religion, you should bring everything together as an equal. Not imposing your religion like it's more important than yours.
Yeah, I agree. Even though I can see the argument to be made that we live in a majority Christian country and therefore at least there should be some extra coverage of it. I can understand that, but I think when we're dealing with middle school, high school students, what you're also imprinting on them is that by teaching a wealth of religious ideas equally, is that this one is not more true, more real, and more legitimate by addressing it in that sense. And I think, yeah, definitely that kind of, specifically to what Jesus says, that kind of, yes, I respect your beliefs, but Jesus loves you kind of mentality is sort of what we're getting at with this equality coverage.
Cindy, I want to come back to something that you mentioned a second ago. You had talked about the idea of biblical literacy, and specifically the way that it's dealt with in Kentucky public schools. Can you explain for people who aren't from around Kentucky, how does Kentucky deal with the Bible now under current legislation?
Well, with the Bible Literacy Act, I guess is what it was, or law that got passed, basically it allows schools to teach, they call it Bible literacy, but it's not an actual English class. They're teaching it as a social studies class, as meant to, I guess, focus more on the history of the Bible. But whether or not that is actually happening is a different story, because I think I read several articles earlier when I was looking up research, and they were saying that it was taught more as a Sunday school class, where they're literally just like, here's the religion, here's what you should believe. I mean, it can be borderline somewhere in between, and in a public setting, especially public schools, I don't really think that that's the best thing to do.
Yeah, there's also a provision, like a statute in the Kentucky Constitution that allows for teachers to read a prayer before class begins. And then there's, this is sort of loosely tied to religion, but corporal punishment within the school is sort of just tied in with that, those educational laws. But yeah, the Bible literacy stuff, yeah, I agree with Cindy. That just sounds like Sunday school to me.
Well, let me make an argument. And I think this is the argument that supporters of biblical literacy would make, that if you want to understand America, if you want to understand American culture, if you want to understand American history, it is impossible to do that outside of an understanding of the Bible. That if you just want to watch American movies and American television, you kind of need to understand the message of the Bible and how that message has been interpreted. So could one argue that if I'm not teaching biblical literacy in public schools, that I'm actually failing to help a new generation of students understand the art, the culture, the history of previous generations? Is that not unfair?
It's completely unfair to say. I'm sorry, but it is, because you can understand how American government works. You can understand how American culture is without the Bible. You might not be able to understand Southern culture without the Bible, but you can understand everything else, because you don't need the basis of the Bible, because America, sorry to break it to everyone, wasn't founded on Christianity. As much as everyone wants to believe it wasn't. It was founded on the idea of getting rich, finding gold, anything else other than religion.
Yeah, and I think if anything, it's almost necessary that you don't include religion, or you don't look at it from religious context to better understand the culture, because then you can look at how religion has impacted American culture and history from its inception. If you're including Christianity as a means of teaching history about, I just don't see the distinction where including it in that way benefits the learning.
And I mean, In God We Trust wasn't added to things until the 1950s. So I mean, if religion hasn't actually been included in there until the 1950s, then why do you need it now to understand culture?
But doesn't religion play a huge role in American culture? But because every time I watch a movie, an American movie, let's say, uh, I don't know, something about slavery. I remember watching a movie and Abraham Lincoln was the want to abolish slavery using Bible passages. So I mean, you always see
That's true.
Bible in the American culture.
Yeah, big things like, and again, what I think a biblical literacy sponsor would suggest, things like, can you understand American culture without, or watch American television without understanding the role of the Jesus, the martyr complex that a lot of American media has? Can you understand American culture without understanding basic biblical stories like Adam and Eve or Jonah and the whale? Do you need to know those? And is high school the appropriate place to teach those stories to students?
You don't need to know them. And high school definitely is an appropriate place. I mean, I guess we could have the same argument with sex education, but if you have something that's specifically stated in your federal constitution that you shouldn't do it, then why are we trying to force it?
Yeah, that's a tough one when you phrase it that way, because you know, I'm an English minor, so I have read a lot of texts, and a lot of them have been American lit texts from the 1770s forward. And yeah, I can see it. You wouldn't catch a lot of stuff if you hadn't been in Bible school for the first 10 years of life. So that's you are posing an interesting question, because you don't need that information to maybe understand the overall of some of the historical context, but to really understand some of the motivations, some of the underlying tension. Maybe you're right. Maybe you do need a little. Maybe you need that history.
Another way that this conversation often gets framed is understanding the cycle of American life and then trying to take that cycle and remove from it religious symbols. So, for example, if you're in an American public school, we get an Easter break. If you're in an American public school, we get a Christmas break because of the importance of those holidays. When you're looking at how holidays are represented in public schools, there's typically is a lot of God, flag, and country sort of wrapped in together with American patriotism. Do you think that it's possible to pull American holidays out of public schools? Or if you leave the holidays in the public school system, is it possible to leave them in, but take out the Christian connotation to the major holidays that the United States observes?
That one was another difficult one to grapple with, because I will attest that as a former high school student, I wouldn't really care what the connotation was break. I was going to take it regardless. And I'm sure the staff were too. But yeah, it's interesting because we observe those breaks. You know, it's a good break for the 2 semesters, but it also is for Christmas. I think that overall, a lot of the religious context has already been removed, other than we call it Christmas break. But yeah, there is definitely a couple times that we get off school for pretty overtly Christian holidays that we don't get off. We don't call it Hanukkah or Kwanzaa Day to get off school. So I don't know if you can remove the connotation from the break, but I don't know that it necessarily needs to go away. I don't think that's really harming anything.
Hey, I'm sorry, go ahead, Cindy.
What?
I said, go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, sorry. I think that it could stay in place. It's just the fact that if other students have different religions, we can't really say that they can't take their breaks. I think that's where the problem is coming, is that you have other religions that have other holidays, but we're not acknowledging them. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the problems are coming from, is from that.
I think it's gonna be difficult to remove those holidays from school because you grew up with Christmas, with Halloween, with Easter, so it's gonna be like difficult to get rid of that tradition, I think.
And even
Yeah, I don't know a lot of non-religious people that don't give out and accept gifts on Christmas. You know, it's a weird thing that it's almost seems to me that those kind of holidays, people don't have as much of an issue with it being Christian related, because Christmas as a gift giving thing is not really, you know, Jesus sanctioned Christmas Day to be gift exchange. So I think the actual practices, maybe the reason that they're not a big deal is the actual practices that take place during them aren't really attached to the religious doctrine themselves. I don't know.
Do you think that it's fair or a reasonable compromise? As Cindy was pointing out earlier, that okay, well, it's fine for Christians to get off 2 weeks for Christmas. However, if there is somebody who is Jewish, they also should be able to get off the 8 days for Hanukkah. If there's somebody who is Muslim, they should be able to get off at least for Eid, but also potentially for all of the Muslim holy days. If you're Hindu, then you should be able to get off for Hindu celebrations. Like, does it just create a mass chaos if we allow religious observances in public schools? Or is it worse if we try to pull Christianity entirely out of American culture?
We're getting some really heady questions. I'd say, this is my personal take. This is maybe not the consensus position, but I think it makes more sense to go the route of pulling Christianity out of, at least, not necessarily, it's a stretch to say out of all of American culture, but out of any public school relation. Yeah, I think it's easier to say, because then you get into things like, well, Christianity gets off for 16 days out of the year, and my observances only let me have 8, so why do they get the extra free 8? You know, it's way easier if I were the administrator to say, or you just, none of you get the day off, and you know, I think that's simpler. I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I think it's simpler.
I don't think that a school, let's say, and a school from the U.S. is gonna have holidays for Muslim religions for those students. I don't think so. So, not gonna happen.
I remember a few years ago where there was a huge controversy because people found out that butterball turkeys were prepared halal, so that way Muslims could buy a butterball turkey. And therefore, Christians had been buying halal meat for years and never knew. And that was enough to basically almost bankrupt an entire company. I think that you're right. I think it'd be interesting to see what would happen if we were to give off, everyone gets off a Muslim holiday.
Yeah, I think that, just to add on to that, I think that's a good point. When you start allowing each of them individually, then I think you open the door to more discrimination, because you will get people saying all of those religions are fine except for Islam, like Jesus and was saying, and you know that there's going to be a high minority, but some sort of satanic uproar, some sort of, you know, it's going to get ridiculous if you go that route. And I'm not saying that belief system or anything is invalid. I'm not questioning that. Just that, you know, culturally we get into a lot of hairy, weedy areas.
Yeah. Well, another one of those hairy, weedy, meaty areas that you have to deal with is this debate over how we teach science in American classrooms. Now, Campbellsville University, being a religious institution, and many religiously affiliated K through 12 schools, we're insulated from a lot of the debate over the role of prayer or the role of holidays. But even the question of what is science and how we teach science is something that has to be addressed in our schools. And of course, I'm talking about this argument between evolution on the one hand and intelligent design and creationism on the other. So to get started, what is the difference between creationism and intelligent design? Can we use them interchangeably, or do they mean completely different things?
Creationism is like the creation of the human soul, like God creates everything. And the intelligent design is like the scientific foundation to the creation of the world, and that everyone are here for a reason, and created by an intelligent entity. That's how you say it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think another interesting distinction is, especially for the classroom debate, that creationism alleges that the world, the universe, and everything began somewhere, as far as I understand it, in the bounds of like 6 to 10 to 12,000 years ago, whenever the biblical beginning of time was, and ascribes that as valid, as some sort of, as like an empirical truth. And I think intelligent design, the reason that this debate has emerged is because intelligent design essentially says all of your science, we're not disputing. We're not disputing. We're going to take everything that the science community says and agree with that, except say that there was an initial mover that started everything, and God. But like everything else, we don't have qualms with, except maybe evolution.
So what then is evolution? If intelligent design says that there is a mover, or if creationism suggests that God created everything, how does evolution explain the origins of the world and the origins of species?
Well, are we talking about Big Bang version of evolution or Darwinism version of evolution?
Take your pick.
Okay, well, they're different. So, I mean, like, Big Bang version is just like explosion, here it is. And then things eventually evolved, is what they say. So, like, it went from one thing to another, and then beings just kind of got more and more complex. But Darwinism's version of evolution is actually more like survival evolution. It's not really like we went from a bird to, I don't know, an animal, mammal, or something like that. It's not like that at all. It's more just like birds live in different parts of the island. Do they have bigger beaks? Do they have smaller beaks? So that's kind of a distinction that really needs to be made in, well, public schools alone.
Evolution, just maybe dovetailing into another question. I think the big debate over evolution comes down to one line that Darwin said in his initial findings in the Galapagos. He described what he saw as a, quote, change of kinds, and that the religious portion of it says that if we're following Dawkins' prescription for evolution, that we would see something like a bird turning into something like a dog over the course of one generation, because it's a change of species instead of a slow progression of. So I don't know what the issue with that in the debate, but I'm sorry, that maybe that's trailing outside of the margins of.
So given the distinctions between the evolutionary understanding, where one kind becomes another kind, or the intelligent design understanding that there is a mover, where do public schools stand right now? Or maybe more importantly, where do governments stand right now as we try to understand the nature of science teaching in the United States?
That was tough.
Governments, you mean just state governments or international? International.
In the United States. So in the United States, how do governments argue that science should be taught? How do the courts argue science should be taught? How do we deal with this creationism versus evolution debate in America now?
Oh man, right now right now I think the two clauses in the Constitution and the Lemon Test sort of overwhelmingly keep creationism and intelligent design out of the classroom. I know I won't venture to quote specific instances, but I recall hearing about different state legislatures trying to get at least intelligent design, and some of them arguing for creationism to be taught in the school system. I don't know. I would assume that courts would have struck that down, but I'm not certain. But overwhelmingly, evolution is the primary version being taught.
An additional battleground of sorts in public schools where religion frequently gets used is in the debate over sex education in America. On the one hand, you have those who argue that we should only be teaching sexuality from a religious standpoint, a Christian standpoint, no sex before marriage. On the other hand, there are those who suggest that no, actually, we should be addressing sexuality more as an organism and teaching American youth about what safe sex might look like, or at least taking into consideration they may engage in sexual activity before marriage. Is this inherently a religious question? Can you remove religion from the debate? Or is this a place that maybe religion should be allowed to step in and say, look, abstinence is quite frankly the only way to stay safe prior to getting married? Cindy, what do you think?
Well, I think it's good to teach the kids safe and sorry. So, I mean, if we teach them proper safe sex as using protection to prevent the spread of diseases, I think that's better, just because not everyone goes by Christianity. Not everyone goes by those standards. So you can't tell them not to do something, because we have this problem where if you tell someone not to do something, they're going to do it. And so, I mean, I say better safe than sorry.
Yeah, not everyone's gonna wait for marriage to have, and everyone can catch something bad. So I think it's gonna be better to have sexual education. It's gonna be good rather than
Sorry, Zeus. You finished. I was just gonna be. Yeah, maybe the best way to approach it is just referring to what we've got on paper legally for it. Is it establishing a religion? Is it we can put it against the Lemon Test maybe, and see that it has some secular legislative purpose, like the first outline, the first standard. And since I think abstinence has a secular purpose, but I think you have to teach it as a pure, maybe the term abstinence as a pure term, because it's obviously tied to religious abstinence. But I think abstinence is, I think it's definitely useful, especially when you're talking to high school kids. But yeah, I think it definitely, if we're gonna teach it, it needs to be some, a secular influence.
We're rapidly running out of time, but just kind of want to go around the table one more time and ask maybe the $20 million question. Do you feel that there is any place at all for a society like the United States to include religion in public education? Or have we reached a point where maybe, as Cindy alluded to earlier, society has changed enough that basically now we just have to keep religion completely at odds or apart from what's happening in public schools? Does religion have any value left today?
I think religion creates and promotes hate between people. Because even if you see people, they are both Christian and they go to different church, they hate each other. My church is better than yours. This one is better than yours. Blah blah blah. So I think the American culture and every culture in the world should have some kind of knowledge about what is religion. Because that religion is almost like love your neighbor, do the good stuff, and you're gonna go to heaven to meet Jesus, Allah, whatever. But it is almost the same roots.
Yeah, I'm gonna, for my $20 million, I'm gonna go with the very complex answer of just no. I don't think it really has a place in our public functions. No. Now, to say that it doesn't have any value is maybe a different discussion. But yeah, in a public sense, if we're going to do it, that's great, but we're going to have to rewrite a lot of paperwork. But no, I don't think it's a good idea.
I think in terms of involving government, it needs to be kept out. But there is no denying that religion gives some people a sort of comfort that some of them need. And if that's what they need, then I think that's more of a personal thing that they should do on their own time. And it doesn't need to be included in government policies or even in public schools, especially if they're funded by the government.
Well, it looks like that's where we're going to have to leave this discussion. I want to thank my panelists for joining us one more time. For those of you who are watching at home, if you haven't found them already, please check out the course website, which can be found at www.cu2018.weebly.com, or find this video along with many of our other videos on YouTube. And we thank you very much for joining us at home. Y'all have a blessed day.